Hey, good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening. Thank you all so much for joining us here. If you're catching us live, we are located right now on YouTube and on Midlands Mediation's Facebook Live. So we ask that you can go ahead and engage with us on those platforms now. And if you're catching the replay, you will be able to find those on Twitter and also on Instagram. Later on this evening, if not tomorrow. But thank you all so much for joining us and taking your time out to join us for our first virtual community conversation series. It's the first one that we've had virtually. Since the pandemic, we've been doing things in person because we like to build that relationship and getting the whole person here. But we are deciding to come now virtually to you so that we can go out into the community from where we are and really start moving us from crisis to conflict transformation. So I am Agnes Knox. I'm the youth coordinator here at Midlands Mediation, and I'm here joined with my executive director.
Hi, I'm Cabrina Bass, Executive Director of Midlands Mediation Center, and I too welcome you to our community conversation series. I'm super excited about this opportunity to engage.
Awesome. Well, before we begin, let's just go ahead and tell people who we are, right? Who is Midlands Mediation?
So Midlands Mediation is a nonprofit organization. We were formed in 1998, and we were pretty much formed as a community mediation center. And a community mediation center basically means that the organization is designed around the community and that we train our community so that they can be part of the center and therefore provide service for their community, because we believe that individuals can make their own decisions and resolve their own conflict. So we are here, and our mission is to help individuals and organizations resolve conflict, improve relationships, and strengthen their communities. Now, we can't solve your problems. We believe that individuals have the capacity to solve their own problems. So therefore, we're here to help provide the tools and resources that you need so that you'll know how to solve your problem, how to engage constructively in conflict. But not only that, we're here to initiate, facilitate, and collaborate together with community partners to bring about positive systemic change in communities. We don't make the change. The community makes the change. We just make sure you have the right partners inside of the process and introduce each other so that we can do this together collaboratively to make a difference in our community. And finally, we are the community. We're not outsiders coming in. We are part of our communities, and we train the community to do their own work. So we're not there to tell you what to do. We're there to provide the resources and tools that you will need in order to make your own decision to move your own community forward. And we really ask the question, what is community to you? And what is a resilient and healthy community for you? Thank you so much, Agnes.
Thank you. And just to let people know that, Midlands Mediation, again, has been doing the work for years now, for over a decade. And so it's extremely important to know that we believe that every community has the right and also the ability to make its own decisions. And each person in that community has a right to self-determination. And that self-determination is a big key. And so, Cabrina, can you go ahead and explain to people what is self-determination if they haven't heard of it before?
So self-determination is a theory. It is a psychological theory that people have the ability to make their own decision that creates their own destiny. And so it is not necessary for somebody on the outside to tell you what to do, but you have within you the power to make those decisions for yourself. And it goes back to the fact, and we teach it to our children, there's no such thing as a bad child. There's a such thing as a person that makes a bad decision. And those decisions are those determinations that you made on your own. So self-determination is your ability to determine what choices you're going to make, be they good or bad. And as my sister Agnes says, no matter what the decision is a consequence that comes with the decision. So self-determination means that we're not here to tell you what to do, but we're here to guide and walk with you for you to make your own decision and make your own choices and come up with your own solution, along with the other party that you're working with to make these things happen, along with the other community partners that we work with to make these things happen.
And I think it's so key and pivotal that with self-determination, you have to have an understanding of, one, your decision, of not what decisions to make, but why are you choosing to make that decision? And then what are the consequences, especially coming from my background in education, spending a decade almost in high school education, really teaching students how to build these life skills, because so often we expect students to grow up, but really what happens is they just evolve their thinking and applying it to different situations. And so right now, our job and our goal, what we want to do is to make sure that we are in the community and that we are equipping the community for with the resources that they need to build and grow stronger. So why now? So why now all of a sudden is Midlands Mediation virtual? Well, that's because of all the things that are viral. Again, MMC has already done the work. We've been in Richland County's Magistrate Court, Lexington County's Magistrate Court. We've also, in the past, have tackled the Confederate flag situation that was brought up a few decades ago. We were spearhead mediating that between the community and the state. But one thing about it is, I'll tell my students and I'll tell my godchildren all the time, the worst thing you can do is show up to a place uninvited, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Midlands Mediation will not show up to a community uninvited, because we believe strongly that the community itself has the right and has the ability to make the decisions that will be able to move that community forward. So we won't show up uninvited, but we are here to help. And so this is our opportunity to come in and just give you some tips, some tools to equip you with how do we move forward from crisis to conflict transformation. Our ultimate goal with these conversations is that you'll invite us into those spaces that you hold. Invite us into your living room. Invite us into your workspace. Invite us into that car ride that you have with your kids, and you're discussing these situations that's happening around the nation, but also in our very state, in our very community, what's happening, and allow us to help transform the conflict in those spaces around you. That is our ultimate goal with these community conversation series. So we want to make sure that we are moving the needle from enraged to engaged, right? Right now, with all the present conflict, it seems like everything has just been brewing up, right? We just been brewing up. And I know Cabrina and I talked a couple days ago, 2 days ago to be exact, and we said we're just one situation away from being the next Minnesota. And here we have now a situation in which an unfortunate situation that has really turned Columbia and the Northeast community upside down. And so our job as mediators, our job as trained mediators, our job as a nonprofit organization is to make sure that we infiltrate those spaces and make sure that we can have a peaceable agreement with all parties involved. And so that process takes time. And that process involves 2 key things. It involves, 1, empowerment, and then 2, recognition. And so Cabrina, can you explain a little bit about that empowerment and recognition piece and how MMC can help empower and both recognize?
Yes. Thank you so much, Agnes. You literally set me up to do some wonderful work right in this space. This whole thing of moving from enraged to engaged requires us to recognize that a conflict happened. Yes. And so something has happened in which the 2 people are no longer in agreement, right? There's one side that believes one thing and another side that believes something different, but both sides have some value or something that is important to them, which is what I call that thing, right? So there's this thing that has caused them to separate and take 2 different paths. And so empowerment says that in the midst of this conflict, you have the ability to figure out what is it that you need in order to move forward. What is it that you want to move forward? And what are the feelings that you're taking with this? So you are empowered to be able to articulate those choices and those things that are needed of you. The second thing is, in this process, you have to recognize. You got to recognize that you're not in this alone. Because if it was just you, it wouldn't be conflict. It's conflict because there's somebody else or some other that's out there that you're disagreeing with. So in order to move through this process, to move from enraged to engage, you got to recognize that there's another side.
Right.
And you got to recognize that that other side is just like you. They have empowerment as well. And they have the need that they have. They have wants also, and they have feelings as well. And so how conflict becomes easy for us is because we begin to see the other as something different, something that's not like me. But when I recognize that that other is just like me, they're human, they have feelings. And more importantly, when I recognize that that other is somebody's daughter, somebody's mother, somebody's son, somebody's father, then I have to recognize the humanity of the other. And just like I want to be treated right, I have to recognize the other wants to be treated right as well. As long as we can remove the humanity from them, it's easy for us not to engage in conflict. But once we recognize that this person too has need, it causes us to see things in a very different light, in a very different way. And so that empowerment allows you to really be part of the engagement. It really allows you to be part of the process, but the inside of that process, it requires you to recognize that other side.
Right. So it's no longer about, it takes just me, the focus off of just me, and it allows me to reframe my thinking to think, well, what is it that this other person may have needed? Because conflict, for one, is a natural thing. Conflict always happens. It doesn't necessarily have to explode, but it happens. Even in the smallest little bits of our life, we might have scheduling conflicts, but how we respond is also in recognition to the humanity in it, to the purpose in it. And I think a lot of times where a lot of the anger and the rage is the emotions behind, you didn't even treat me as a human. You didn't even treat me with decency or respect. And so building that relationship starts first with having relations. How am I in relationship to this other person that I'm having a conflict with? How am I in relation with this management conflict that I may be having at my job? And so having that power to say, you have the decision and you can control your own actions, one. But then two, we're moving forward and saying, I have the responsibility to recognize the humanity in someone else. At the basic level of human decency, I have that responsibility. So the enragement, yes, it's valid, right? It's very valid where we are right now. But how do we transform that to engagement, to engage our community and to engage our stakeholders, to hold them responsible for saying that these situations aren't appropriate and it won't be tolerated, not necessarily by violence, but also by our votes and by our voices and being vibrant and being visual in our community to make sure that this does not happen to another child, another person ever again. And so that's where do we start? Where do we start with that, right? We start by defining what is conflict. Because conflict happens. It's natural. What is conflict and how often does it happen? When was our first conflict? Go ahead, Karina.
Yeah, so one of the things we have to realize is that the reason we see the situation as conflict is because it triggers something in us that is associated with our past. And so one of the exercises we go through when we meet new mediators, individuals that want to be involved in this peacemaking work, is we ask the question, when was your first conflict? Now I want you to think about it too. When was the first time you experienced conflict? Now, silence is an amazing tool. So we're going to give a moment of silence for you to think. When was that first time you experienced conflict? So some of you probably didn't go way back. You probably thought about something more frequently or something that recently happened. But I want you to know the first time you experienced conflict was when you were a little child and somebody said no. And it could have been you wanted to touch the stove and they said, no, don't touch that. So the question becomes, when that person said no to you, what was your response? Because now you got conflict because you have something that you want, something that you want to do, something that you need to do, and somebody is preventing you from doing that. So we have conflict. So when you said no, how did they respond? Because the way they responded to you created your conflict response back. So if the person said no, and you began to cry and scream, and their response to your crying and your screaming was to calm you down and have a conversation and talk about the reason why we don't touch that and that kind of thing, you develop a skill of collaboration and or compromise because there was reasoning going on. If the person, when you screamed and hollered, they just said, go ahead and touch it, then you develop a skill of accommodating, of compete. I mean, you begin to compete because you know if I throw this tantrum, I get it my way. And so you develop a style to compete. If that person said no and you cried and they hit you or they harshly disciplined you and not allowed you to express your voice, you learn how to avoid conflict. Because the next time when somebody said no, you withdrew. You didn't engage at all. So you become a person that uses avoidance. But then there's another style. When they said no and you began to cry and scream and they started to say, oh my God, you hurting my feelings. I can't believe you're acting like this. You begin to stop so that you can accommodate them and make them feel better so you don't touch it. So you develop a style that you pretty much accommodate the situation. And it's not necessarily avoidance, it's just a way that you just let them have their way. And so we have to remember those conflict styles. The one is where we fight for it, and that's compete because we want it to be my way. Or we either withdraw and go in, and so it's no way. Nobody gets anything because everybody's pretending like it ain't really happening. Or we go to the step of where we are collaborating and we're creating our way together. Or we go to compromise where we each give up something so some way can be made. And the other one is when we accommodate, we'll let them have their way. And so the way we respond to conflict is the way we were taught how to respond. So when you see people that are very aggressive toward conflict, those are people that pretty much are used to having things their way. And so they fight for their way. Now, you don't always use your response in the same way. It really will vary on the degree of the content in which you are in conflict over, as well as the relationship.
And that degree of content is really based off what triggered you and how did it trigger you, right? And so one of the things with teaching, high school students, I can tell people, no, this child just hasn't started behaving this way. This has been a pattern of behavior, right? And so it's my job as an educator, as somebody who wants into my personal life, I want everybody to grow with me as I'm learning. Because I know how reckless my mouth can be at times, but I'm learning that sometimes doesn't necessarily get me the correct outcome desired outcome that I want, because now I have to do damage control. And so going back to really thinking about, okay, this is a conflict because I feel uneasy. Let me understand my emotions. This is the emotion that I'm feeling, and this is why I'm feeling this. Because once that, no one else is responsible for understanding your emotions if you haven't learned to communicate that emotion just yet. But we can read the room. I can understand that something's bothering you, but if I don't understand why, and part of that recognition, I can ask you questions based on why, but for the most part, I need to understand, how do I maintain and stay in control of myself? And how do I then exhibit that or communicate that to someone else? But in a crowd, we can see multiple different conflict styles in a crowd, right? You have yours that are just there, who want to be in the mix. We have those that are just enraged because it triggered them. And it only took one. It only took one time. They was looking for a reason, right? And so it's how do we move from past to present, and how do we retrain our brains to really think about conflict differently? Because there is a choice. There is a choice that we can make. There is a choice that we can decide whether we want to move forward or we want to remain stuck in our emotions. And if we choose the latter, we will never move down to de-escalating and moving forward, not moving away from it, but how do we move forward so that this will never happen again, right? And so the next question will allow us, then what is a crisis, right? And shout out to Oxford Dictionary. Says a crisis is a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger. So, Cabrina, do you think that we are in a crisis?
Oh, we're in a major crisis right now. We're not in one crisis. We're in multiple crises. We have the crisis of the pandemic. Because remember, this whole thing of conflict is that I've lost something that I need. Mm-hmm. And if we look at the pandemic, what was taken away from us was our freedom. We were used to being free to go where we wanted to go, do what we want to do, touch what we wanted to touch, talk to who we wanted to talk to in the way that we wanted to do it. And now we can't do that. So that's crisis. I'm in crisis. It's major crisis. Right. But not only that, I got conflict and I got crisis. Not only is it the pandemic that's going on, second thing is the racial tension in our world. It has risen really, really high. And it's not that it wasn't there in the beginning, but now we got cameras and people can see it happening. Right. All these years, people of color, Black people specifically, have been saying, we've been treated a certain kind of way. We've been treated differently, but nobody believed it because there were no evidence other than our word. Although that made you feel some kind of way that you didn't believe my word, and you need evidence to show you that what I have been saying for 400 years is actually true. So we have a racial tension that's going on. That's a second crisis. But our third crisis that we sometimes miss, and that it is really important, is that in this moment right now, for the first time, our democracy is being threatened. Mm. That right that people have told us for years that we have to vote, and the freedom to vote, and to express ourselves and to elect the people that we want. We really have to constantly wrestle within ourselves. Are we a democracy where it is the voice of the people, which is all people? Mm-hmm. Or is it an oligarch where it is just the voice of those that have the power? And that's a whole nother conversation that hopefully we're going to have one day. We're going to have it. We're going to have it. Conversation, because that balance of power is significant in these crises that we're experiencing. So right now, as a country, we're experiencing multiple crises at the same time, which is resulting in more conflict through us, because we really don't know how to respond to all this that's coming at us simultaneously. Absolutely. That was a mouthful. And it really encompasses, because really, you know, when and I can speak for myself, but when I'm super emotional, my first response is always probably something very disrespectful in my mind. You know, we talked about this. And in our line of work with mediation, we're trained to be impartial, but we have to first deal with our own feelings behind what is going on first, but then begin to ask those questions to move us out of, okay, I know this isn't just affecting me, but what is it? How is it? How am I triggered? And then how do I move on, right? How do I move past just being triggered to being able to triumph through these trials? And so one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that a crisis doesn't necessarily last forever, but it only lasts as long as the community that's affected by it allows it to last. And so one of the definitions that Oxford Dictionary gave us is that a crisis is similar to a critical point, right? And what is a critical point? It's the turning point of a disease, when an important change takes place, indicating either recovery or death. And I believe that, you know, in the state of South Carolina, even here in the Midlands, we are at a critical point where there is a turning point that could be done, whether that's recovery or death. And it's really up to the community to decide, how do we want this to go, right? We have these conversations, and because of our anger, it comes off very aggressive. Yes, I think it's so important for us to be visual, and it's important for us to be vocal. I will never tell somebody to refrain from doing that. But what I'm asking is that we begin to reframe our minds, because that's something that I had to do even with coming through the mediation training, which is a great training that I would tell anybody that they should sign up for in the future, to really learn how to not necessarily conflict resolution, but conflict transformation, because conflict will happen and not all conflict can be resolved. Right? That is so right. But I do believe that most conflict does not have to go to the judicial system, especially if we are able to, one, recognize the humanity in each other, and two, be empowered and equipped to engage in those hard conversations, and one being what we're having right now. Yeah, and I like the analogy of the disease. And a friend of mine shared where we are right now is that this is a deep wound that we have in our country that we've never treated. And so if you ever had a deep cut and you didn't get it treated at the time, it happens when you go to the doctor, what they tell you is that they're going to have to open it wide up so they can clean it out. Yeah, our wound has been open, wide open. And so we're in the process of the cleansing of it. And so all the bad of who we are and our context and what we do is oozing out of our wound. And so it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to be painful. And we need to be prepared to endure the pain that we're going to experience and be very, which we're going to talk about next time, curious and to ask those questions, because we don't know. We really don't know. So we have to be open through this process that we're going through in our healing of the pandemic, in our healing of racial tension, and in our healing of our democracy. And so there is a process, and we often say we have to learn how to trust the process.
Most that can preach. Trusting that process, because we evolve. We don't just change. We just don't one day happen to know the right thing to do or the right thing to say, when to say it. But it is a process in learning, how do I evolve? Because you have something to offer into this world, and your thoughts, your opinions, and your life matters. It matters to the people around you. It matters to the people that are in your household. It matters to our democracy and what we have at stake. And so, especially with my job in really, providing parents and youth resources to doing that, and then all the work that Midlands Mediation, the valued and quality work that Midlands Mediation does, really draws people in and say, there is a different way. There is a different option that can get the change that you need, and not necessarily the quick and quickly gratifying change that we so desire, right? Yeah. So moving us from that, from violence, even in some cases, to being vibrant community stakeholders, to being to being vocal and visual in our communities by building relationships and relations with one another, right? So we definitely want to make sure we're doing that, but it starts with two things. One, understand that conflict is not a normal. It's a natural process. Conflict always happens. There will never be another day in your life that you don't have conflict, whether that's a schedule change, whether you don't even know what to wear because we don't know what the weather is going to be like if it's caught from. Those are all conflicts, and how we handle those conflicts matter consequentially in the end. Whether that's a good consequence or a bad consequence, it matters. So again, understand that conflict will exist. Understand that it will get worse before it get better. And we are feeling those effects of that worse. But we don't have to live in fear, right? That we can not only trust the process, but trust yourself enough to know that you can be in control of your own actions and your own thoughts in regards to the community. And then 3, making the decision, how do we want this to end? Mm-hmm. How do we want this to end for our community? How do we want this to end for ourselves? How do we want this to end for our future generations? Because the decisions and the things that we decide to do now will matter to them. Because at the end of the day, one thing I know about teaching is whether or not you taught a lesson intentionally, it was something still learned. And so we are here to model what that looks like. And I really do hope and I believe that there will be people in the community, our community members will decide to latch on and to invite us into those spaces really and truly to begin some mending process. But one key thing you said, that healing. We need that healing, but then we need to head in the right direction.
Yeah, and it's important, the conversations, and the conversations are difficult. And it's hard for us to hear one another. And I think you spoke earlier about being here to hear, HERE to HEAR. Yeah. And it's that uninterrupted time so that we can hear the other person and not invade that thought or that process, so we can clearly hear what's going on. Because we don't know. We really don't know until we afford the other person the opportunity to share so that we can know and have a better understanding. We move too fast to resolution when we have not really understood the conflict. And so taking the time to understand, what is this need? What is this feeling that they're going through? What are my needs? What are the feelings I'm going through? So let's identify that first and then determine, can we fix this? Is this something that we can together come up with a resolution? And if we can't, are we willing to do the work that's necessary to come to a creative solution? And that solution may be, we're not going to agree, but we're going to be able to live in community together with these boundaries. Not that we agree, but we can establish our boundaries and how we will function from this point forward. And so don't think if we don't come up with a resolution, we just stay in conflict. No, we're going to manage the conflict. We're going to find a way to manage this conflict that we can maintain our own identity and who we are within our boundaries that we establish together. Me being one person and the other person that's in this conflict with me agree that these become our boundaries. And so that's how we can make things happen. That's how we can make things better. That's how we can move from enraged to engage through a process of empowerment and recognition.
And I'm so excited about the work that we are beginning, even right now in our virtual spaces, about the work that we're doing here. And our goal is to really partner with our community members that are already in the community that are doing the work, partner with those that want to learn how to do it. But it starts here. It starts having these uncomfortable conversations, but with the process. Through that, understand that conflict is going to happen, but understand at that critical point, we can decide through self-determination how we want it to end. And so next week, we're going to talk about curiosity. What does it mean to be curious, right? What does it mean to start thinking about what it is that we do know and what it is that we don't know? And I'm so excited to have that conversation with you, Cabrina. And I want to see if we can get any other guests, if those are interested in joining this small conversation here, making it much larger, of where they can contact us and how they can get in contact with us.
So you can contact us. We're the Midlands Mediation Center. Our phone number is 803-714-1176. You can dial extension 10, which will get you to our wonderful office manager who will be able to direct you. You can fax us if you're still using the fax at 803-574-3002. Or right now, we're not doing it in person, but our physical office is located at 1607 Hardin Street. Yes, we're in the community, as we stated earlier. And our post office box is P.O. Box 5942, Columbia, South Carolina. And you can always reach out to me or Agnes from my email. I'm the executive director at midlandsmediation.org. I considered it poorly abbreviated as XDirect. But you can use that email, or you can reach out to Agnes, who's our youth coordinator at youth@midlandsmediation.org. So Agnes is there for our community to not only help our children create a new generation that look at conflict in a brand new way and do resolution in very creative ways, but she's also there for our parents who don't know how to engage their children in resolution. So to come up with new ways in households so that we don't respond to conflict by yelling and wonder why our kids are yelling back. So we are here. We are 100% here to help our community, to help them work together to resolve their own conflict, their own way, to strengthen their relationships, and most importantly, to strengthen our overall community. Agnes, thank you so much for this idea of these community conversations. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the next time we get together and talk about curiosity and not being so certain about so many things. So I appreciate you. I love you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the space.
Oh, no, and thank you so much for holding space with me and for me. And one thing, if anybody out there wants to be a friend of MMC, we are having a friends giving fundraiser, this Saturday, April 17th. And so we will have it in the chat, we'll have it in a group, or you can just email us at either xdirect@Midlands Mediation or youth@Midlands Mediation. We are always looking for friends and partners to partner with this organization, because the work we do is priceless, but it does come with a cost. And so we do want to make sure that we're still able to be out in the community to function and do the work that's needed for our community.
Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good one.